custom speech, which is so beyond the cookie cutter type format that we normally hear about. She is always bringing something different. Tonight will be no different. As she talks about a serious topic, she's going to bring several people's stories to our attention and bring awareness. Let's welcome Evina.
Every 8 minutes, a child is sexually abused. 93% of those child victims are by perpetrators they know. They could be someone like a teacher, a coach, religious leader, even a family member. One Netflix documentary illustrates this perfectly. If you've ever seen the documentary on Netflix called Abducted in Plain Sight, this documentary setting is in the mid-1970s, where a married man named Richard B. Berchtold befriended the Broberg family with the goal of sleeping with the oldest child named Jan, age 12 then. He accomplished this goal twice. In those days, in the 70s and before, terms like pedophile and child molester just did not exist. It was an acceptable culture for an adult to sleep with a child. An example of that was illustrated in the Alice Walker's novel turned movie, The Color Purple. For those of you who have seen that movie, the 13, 14-year-old young Celie was sexually assaulted continuously by her father, whom later on was sent off was forced to be married to a fully grown man named Albert. Well, we urge people to report these types of incidences, right? What happens in those cases? Well, with some people, they seek justice. Proper or improper justice. Whether they call it the police or they do the policing. Some, when a child tells an adult, some want to keep it a secret because it feels like it brought shame and embarrassment to their family. And in other cases, when a child tells an adult, the adult will accuse the child of telling a lie. Why are you lying on them like that? You know they ain't gonna do nothing like that to you. And other forms of resistance that a child would meet is if the child's trying to tell the parent of what's happening. The parent will dismiss them and tell them, can't you see I'm on the phone? Can't you see grown folks talking, going somewhere and play? This makes it very hard for any child who already took a lot to muster up the courage to let somebody know that this kind of event has happened to them. And they meet resistance like no one cares. Imagine being disregarded. Imagine being that child being disregarded, trying to come up with the courage to tell someone that this terrible thing has happened. Or worse yet, because of the sexual assault has happened to you, more than likely by an adult, that your trust in adults vanished. So I tell anybody anything, they're not going to listen to you. You don't even trust them anymore. Well, what happens to these children of sexual assault? They grow up. They grow up marinating over years, even decades of what has happened to them in their head. Having feelings of guilt, shame, and blame, feeling guilty and blaming themselves. Maybe I could have stopped it. Maybe I could have been prevented from happening. It was all my fault. Or having low levels of self-worth. A lot of times these self-worth seeds have been planted in their heads by the perpetrator. And also, as an adult, living life in careers, relationships, everyday life becomes very hard. In relationships, they have problems with setting boundaries, setting safety zone boundaries. And when they become intimate with someone, it becomes very difficult for them even then. They may even have flashbacks in the middle of intimacy with their current partner. So, have you ever met a survivor, an adult survivor of child sexual assault? How do you approach them? How do you respond to someone who has been through such a horrible event? Because believe me, even if something has happened decades ago, responding to them in such a way can positively or negatively affect them today. One thing I do not want to see anyone else do is to perform this one thing. And check yourself if you're one of these people that do this. It's called victim shaming. What is victim shaming? Victim shaming is shaming or blaming the victim of their own attack, even partially. And in my personal opinion, I think victim shaming is asinine. Here's why. 3 things happen. 1, you marginalize the victims. 2, the chances of those victims reporting their cases is minimal. 3, you minimize the criminal's act. Now, I don't know if my autism is acting up and I just don't understand this social cue and I kind of refuse to accept this social cue, but why is it socially acceptable to minimize the act of an adult having sex with a child? Where does the source of victim shaming comes from? How did this come about? Why do people victim shame? 1 is ignorance. People on the outside looking in with no facts. Meanness. Just plain evil for no reason. As what I would say, demon is as demon does. Sense of superiority. You know, the internet trolls think they know everything. They want to put themselves in a place of, Mr. Know-it-all, Mrs. Know-it-all, and say what their piece of what they think happens. But I think the most interesting of all of these, is the idea of a safe world. There are people who think that they're living in a safe world. This couldn't happen to me. The safe world syndrome allows that person to detach themselves from the victim. It must be something wrong with you, or you must be doing something bad, or you must have sinned, or God is punishing you. You're doing something wrong for that kind of negative thing to happen to you, and I must be protected. Not thinking the realization of this could happen to anyone. Just doesn't fall in them. I want to tell a story of this lady named Mary Yarbrough. Mary Yarbrough, when she was little, she was sexually abused by her brother, who was babysitting her, while their parents would be away at work running errands. Every time the assault happened, she would look at this fake wooden panel lining the walls of her bedroom, wishing for each episode to be shorter than the last. The brother would even invite their male cousin on occasions to sexually assault her. And this went on from age 4 to age 11. How did it stop? Well, their mother walked in on them. The mother got the attention of the father. The father was about to physically abuse the brother, but the brother dashes out of the house running away. The victim is reprimanded with a whipping because the mother feels, you should have told me what happened. In actuality, Mary did try to tell her mom several times, and she was disregarded. So 6 years go by, and she thinks the coast is clear until one day she's raped at gunpoint by a complete stranger at age 17 and got pregnant. So of course she didn't report that. Remember the first part of her life, with the first 7 years, where she was assaulted and she tried to tell someone and nothing happened? In her mind, it's not going to happen again. So there was no report, no police, no justice. And when her mom found out about her pregnancy, still no report, no police, no justice. She also had challenges in her everyday life. Barely finished high school. She dropped out of college. She had dead-end jobs that she could barely keep. And when she was in relationships, being intimate, there were times where she would scream in the middle of intimacy, having flashbacks of her assault. And the people, her mates at the time, because they're not mental specialists, mental health specialists, nor were they obligated to try and help her. She was also victim shamed. She was accused of being promiscuous and hanging around the wrong crowd, or maybe even dressing provocatively. None of that was true. She didn't hang around in the bush because she was terribly sheltered. She didn't dress provocatively because she dressed in really big, baggy clothes, not showing her girly figure. So when she did talk to people, people responded negatively or make themselves bigger than her situation. But if that would have happened to me, I would have fought back. I would have told, I don't know what's wrong with you. But when you are in the heat of the moment of when something happens, will you really be able to do that? I've seen people who are trained in CPR, first aid. When the actual emergency happens, they forget everything they were taught. So in the actual moment, you never know how you will really respond in a situation. So you're probably wondering, what happened to Mary Yarbrough? Or what happened to her kid? Mary Yarbrough is standing right in front of you. That was my birth name. And my kid, well, he's at work right now. Taking care of his own family. And that's probably why I have problems with eye contact, if y'all ever noticed. So I apologize for all of those times. So the purpose of my talk was to bring awareness of adults who survived sexual abuse as a child. This may be in your family, or you may have had this experience yourself, and it's been very hard for you to think about or talk about it. If they tell you, if anyone in your family or anyone that you know and love tells you that something has happened to them and that effect, if a child comes to you, be that hero. Don't victim shame them. They didn't ask for these events to happen to them. Don't let it become a secret because you think it's going to shame them. Find justice for them. tell somebody, call 911. That is a crime. Be their hero and think of their future.